Okay, it looks like we are recording.
We are good to go.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. Our numbers are a little bit low. I'm hoping that following our meeting this evening, if you have the opportunity or talking to your neighbors, you can encourage them to watch the presentation, which will link to the Summer Villages website, so that your neighbors can get some of the information that we're providing tonight as well, so they're able to provide us with some input as we move forward with this project, which is rewriting and revising the Summer Villages land use bylaw. And that's what we're here to talk to you about tonight. So my name's Jane Dauphiny, and Brad McDonald was talking to you there a moment ago. I'm the principal for a company called Municipal Planning Services. We are the planning service provider for the Summer Village, and we work with a number of the other, well, all of the other summer villages around the lake, and the county Wetaskiwin as well. And I may look familiar because we were also involved in the Summer Villages Municipal Development Plan project, and we're working with the Summer Villages and the county on the intermunicipal development plan, which is currently underway. It's been underway for a little while, and I think it might be underway for a little while longer yet. We'll see how that one goes. Those are a little bit more difficult to negotiate. So we provide subdivision authority services to the Summer Village, and then provide assistance to administration and support when some current types of planning matters arise that require a little bit of additional advice. So that's their involvement normally day to day with the Summer Village, and then we've been contracted to assist with this land use bylaw review project as well. So that's a little bit about us. Brad works with the company, and if you have had or met me before, you might have met Allison Roseland, who also works in our office and has been quite heavily involved in the intermunicipal development plan project and was involved in the IDPs as well. So Brad already gave you the rundown on this presentation being live streamed to YouTube, and that we're recording it. And that's because, you know, sometimes we pick the right night and we get lots of numbers for our live presentation, and some nights it's not the right night for everybody. So we found it very successful to record these sessions so that we can provide the same information to other members of the community who are unable to join us. As we go through the presentation this evening, there's a couple of areas where, through our discussions with council and administration, we had long conversations, I guess, about how to regulate some types of uses within the Summer Village, and where there are some areas there that council had requested that we flag for the community's input specifically. We've identified a couple of poll questions, and you know, the responses will be low, the response rate here, so that the answers aren't binding in any way. It's just an opportunity for us to be, you know, because we have you here, ask you directly some specific information in some of those areas that we know that the council was really struggling with to figure out what direction to go. So you'll find a couple of polls pop up as we move through the presentation. There's not too many, but there are a few. And our intention tonight really is to provide you with some information about the draft land use bylaw that we've been working with. And I want to stress that it's a draft document. It is certainly not a complete document. At this point, we've done an analysis of where there are opportunities to make revisions to the document, and I'll take you through some of those in a moment. And had some conversations with administration about challenges that they have had with the existing document over the last few years in terms of interpretation, or areas where, you know, there seems to be conflicts within different provisions of the document. And then some new types of development that's been occurring in the Summer Village that is not really clearly regulated. So we've got some direction from council and administration in regards to those items. And then there's some other things too that I'll cover as we go through, that we looked at as we were doing the analysis and making recommendations about changes to the document. So the document was only posted on the Summer Villages website on Monday. We are not expecting you to, you know, have had an opportunity yet to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. What we'd like tonight is just to have the opportunity to present some of those changes to you, and to flag some of those areas where we're expecting or anticipating there to be significant changes to the document, so that as you do your review of the land use bylaw over the next couple of weeks, we've drawn your attention to those areas in particular to make sure that you have a look at them and give you the opportunity to provide us with some input after the meeting tonight as well. So we're not putting you on the spot tonight. You certainly do have the opportunity to share your comments and ask us questions through the chat. And then we'll have a little bit of an open discussion when we get to the end of the session too. I've got about, I think it's 38 slides that I need to go through this evening. Land use bylaws are long. They're the biggest bylaw that your municipality has. And I apologize in advance, they're a little bit dry. They're a lot dry in some instances, but they're really, really important documents too, because they establish the rules and regulations for how you can do development and what types of development you could do on your property. So I guess this really marks the beginning of the engagement component of the project. Once we've had the opportunity to present this information to you tonight and get some of your preliminary comments, we will leave you with the document for the next few weeks. I've got a date at the end of the presentation when we'd like to have your feedback by. When we get your input on the document, we'll compile that and share that with council and administration, and then make sure that it's also posted on the municipality's website so that you can have a look at the information that was provided by your neighbors, and the information that you provided to us directly, and any recommendations that we've made to council that would be related directly to that input that you've provided. Council will carefully consider all of the input that they're provided with, and we will make adjustments to the document based on the direction they provide. And then we'll start getting the document ready to go to council formally for consideration of approval. So we're probably into what we would consider to be the third phase of the project. We've done the background analysis, we've made some recommendations, council's had a look at them, and there's areas that they're happy with and there's areas that they are not comfortable with yet. And now it's in a format where they were comfortable with us releasing it to the community, where you guys can have a look at it and let us know what you think too. So it is in draft, and there's certainly the opportunity to make adjustments to it. There are areas for sure that are not finalized, and I'll point some of those out as we move through. So just by way of background, I wanted to provide you with a little bit of information about the planning hierarchy. So how the municipality's planning documents work together with the legislation, and just within the hierarchy of documents that your municipality as a Summer Village has. So you do currently have an intermunicipal development plan. It's an older intermunicipal development plan and it's being updated. You also have a municipal development plan that is relatively new, almost brand new, and you have a land use bylaw. In terms of the hierarchy of those documents, the intermunicipal development plan is the highest level document. If there's a conflict, for example, between the municipal development plan and the intermunicipal development plan, what's in the intermunicipal development plan will take precedence over what's in the municipal development plan. The way that the municipal development plan and the land use bylaw are intended to work together is that the municipal development plan is intended to provide a future-oriented goals, policies, and objectives, or goals, objectives, and policies that provide high-level guidance to the municipality and are to guide council when making decisions about changes, significant changes to development pattern within the municipality if they're ever proposed, and then to provide some guidance and direction relating to infrastructure and environmental policies as well. It's now that we've done the municipal development plan, one of the things that we needed to do was look back at the land use bylaw to make sure that the land use bylaw was set up in such a way that it would help implement and enable the policy direction that is in the new municipal development plan. So we have those higher level policy documents that guide and direct the toolbox, which is the land use bylaw. The land use bylaw is a bylaw that all municipalities in the province have to have. It doesn't matter how big your municipality is, all municipalities are required to have one. It establishes processes for subdivision and development applications, notification, enforcement, and appeals. and it establishes regulations for specific and general types of development within the municipality. All land use bylaws have a map, and that map identifies different districts and places all of the properties within the municipality into those different districts. Sometimes they're referred to as zones. That's terminology that comes out of the US that isn't in our legislation, but it might be the term that you're more familiar with. And then within each one of those districts or zones, it identifies lists of permitted and discretionary uses that are allowed within each of those underlying districts. Your existing land use bylaw, which is bylaw number 73, was approved in 2004. So it's quite an old document. Normally, land use bylaws should be looked at every 5 years, just to make sure that we have the opportunity to identify and address areas that aren't working as they should, or in order to make adjustments to the document to accommodate different types of, development pressures that the municipality may be experiencing. So this document is a little bit older, and it's certainly time for this document to be updated to make sure that it's consistent with current requirements. In terms of what our process has been and where we're going with this, we started by identifying areas of focus with council and administration, and then we looked at the existing land use bylaw and identified opportunity areas where we knew changes had to be made. There were some substantial amendments to the Municipal Government Act, which is the piece of legislation that enables municipalities to make decisions about land management and development within their boundaries. There was a number of significant amendments to the MGA, which have come into effect over the last few years. There's the modernization of the Municipal Government Act, I think rolled out in 2017, 2018, and then the Red Tape Reduction Act, which came into effect 2 Decembers ago. So those changes, and I'll talk about them as we move through the presentation, resulted in some procedural changes to how we do business. And the existing land use bylaw doesn't currently reflect those changes to the administrative process that were legislated to follow. So we needed to change the document just to address those specific things. And then we also saw this as an opportunity to make sure that the current regulations are reflecting what the needs and interests of the community are, that they reinforce through the design requirements the character of your existing community, which is really cool and neat. Very different from some of the other summer villages on the south side of the lake. And then we wanted to take the opportunity to incorporate watershed planning best practices into the land use bylaw where it was possible to do so. So those are some of the things that we took into consideration when we were preparing the first draft of the document. We shared that with administration and council, and they've reviewed it. And I think we've made 2 different sets of changes to that document to reflect the direction provided by council and administration. It says there, Brad, that we did a survey to gather information from community members. I don't remember doing that for Norris.
We did that back in the summer when we had a very first draft. And it was more of a general survey to just gauge some ideas about land use and development opportunities and constraints, what some folks' opinions were on some broader topics. And because we knew that we were going to be doing engagement in the spring rather than the fall, we wanted to be able to put the draft at that time together with a little bit of community engagement.
Okay. Did we ever present these survey findings to the community? Did we share those with Sylvia to put on the website? I don't remember that either.
We definitely shared it with administration. I don't know if it's on the website. I will check and see if it can be put there.
I remember now that you're mentioning it, that we presented it to council, but I bet you we did send it in a format where we were reporting back to the community. So yep. Community members, that's something that I believe we need to do sooner rather than later. So maybe I think what we'll do is we'll share that information as part of the What We Heard report, as part of the summary of the engagement. So you can see what some of that initial feedback was from that first touch when we did that first survey with you a year ago. Okay, thank you, Brad. So that step was taken at the beginning of the process. I think it was part of the announcement that the Summer Village was undertaking this work to try and make sure that the community was aware of that. And then the order of these is a little bit messed up because we did do the survey before we prepared the draft. Once we had reviewed the draft with council and administration, and I apologize for that, and council gave us the thumbs up, we're presenting the draft to the community, which happened earlier on this week. So just brand new that. And this evening is our opportunity to try and present some of those changes to you, and just flag for you those areas that we think might be controversial, to give you the opportunity to provide us with your input before we take these things back to council for finalization. So I wanted to give you a little bit of information about some of our findings as we were going through the analysis and identifying opportunities where we could make and should make changes to the document. One of the things that we noticed right away when we were looking at the land use bylaw is that the list of definitions and existing regulated uses, so those are the uses that are identified as permitted or discretionary in the districts, was quite limited. And that there was definitely an opportunity to expand upon those definitions to provide more information about the way that the terms that are used in the land use bylaw, not just the uses, but also just some of the language which is used in the land use bylaw. Well, some of it is planning jargon, and where we've used that information, those words or terms which are used very specifically in relation to land development and land management, we wanted to make sure that we'd also defined those terms, because it's not very valuable to anybody if we're using language in these documents that you don't have any access to. So we've expanded substantially the list of definitions and provided some more information and types of uses for different types of developments that we would anticipate to see within the municipality over the next 5-10 years. We also noticed that there was an opportunity to work with the language and structure of the regulations to revise them to improve clarity and consistency and interpretation. And that's one of the challenges, I think, with all land use bylaws, but it's something that over the last 5-10 years we've been working on to try and improve. Land use bylaws as bylaws are written in a type of legalese. They're a lot more, the language of a land use bylaw is a lot different than the language of a municipal development plan, although the policy language in a municipal development plan is also quite specific to that type of document too. But it does lend itself to be not as easy to read through as some other types of documents. And so where we have identified over years of working with documents like this, that there's some challenges in the interpretation of the regulatory language, we've tried to include some diagrams to assist with the interpretation there too, and just make sure that the words that we're using are defined. We noticed that the administration sections of the document needed to be updated, and that's what I was talking about a little bit earlier, in order to reflect the recent changes to the MGAs, the Municipal Government Act, that affect specifically development permit processing, notification, and appeals for development and for subdivision. And then we also noticed that the structure of the document could be modified to improve readability. It was a bylaw with a number of schedules that had provisions in them that were equally as important as the body of the document. And that's something that's sort of driven me crazy over the years with older land use bylaws. And I don't know why they were developed that way originally, but because all of the bylaw is equally as important, and because when you're using a land use bylaw, often you have to look at more than one section to figure out how and what the regulations are affecting the development that you want to do, we just put it all into the body of the document. Makes it a little easier, I think, and more intuitive to use. So I had mentioned that the Summer Village has recently adopted a municipal development plan, their very first. And if any of you were at any of those sessions, engagement sessions, as we went through that project, you'll remember that the Summer Village did that because they had to. There were changes, some of those changes I was mentioning to the Municipal Government Act were changes to how statutory plans and who has to adopt statutory plans. And it used to be that municipalities under 3,500 people could adopt a municipal development plan, but didn't have to. And in about 2017, that changed, and all municipalities were required by the province to adopt one. So that's why the Summer Village went through that exercise. But I think it was a beneficial exercise to go through. It gave us the opportunity to compile and look at some of the environmental data within the municipality, and then establish a vision and a way forward to guide this particular project. So within that municipal development plan, there, in each section, there's a high level goal statement. And we looked at those goal statements to help give us some direction to identify areas that we needed to focus on as we went through this review. So some of the areas in particular that we took into consideration and are trying to help implement through this land use bylaw review process, we're ensuring that the provisions within the document are designed in such a way to help mitigate risk associated with different types of environmental features within the community, and then to conserve significant environmental features and help maintain the character of the community. As we went through the MDP development, it was clear that through administration and council and the community members who participated in the engagement that you like being a low density community and you're a seasonal and full-time community. So we needed to ensure that the types of developments that are enabled within the bylaw facilitate both those types of residential uses within your community and support additional recreational opportunities. And it was also identified as very important to make sure that the regulations and design features within the land use bylaw help to ensure environmental stewardship within your community, and that new development that occurs happens in a way to minimize potential risks to the watershed or ecological features within your community. And if possible, to enhance some of those features too. So when we're thinking about different regulations within the land use bylaw and different ways of establishing the rules around designing new development on the site, we were thinking about ways of achieving some of these goal statements that are in the MDP. The other ones that are worth noting, I think, to ensure that infrastructure efficiently meets present and future needs. So to ensure that new development doesn't have a negative impact on the efficiency or the costs of infrastructure within the municipality, because you guys end up paying for those things over the short or long term. And then to try and restructure the document to make it more transparent and ensure that it is forward thinking. So those were some of the things that guided us as we were making recommendations to council and administration about some of the changes in the land use bylaw. The last things I wanted to identify for you, because they were things that focused our review too, were that we noticed that the regulations could be revised to ensure that new developments help to maintain the existing character. So, I mean, you are very unique around the lake. Your built form, the way that your subdivision pattern or your lots are established is different than any other of the summer villages around the lake, and it's really, really lovely. And when you drive into the community, the big old trees and scale of the houses is quite different than in some of the other areas. And my understanding through our discussions with council and administration is that the appearance and the character of the community is important to try and maintain moving forward. So those are some things that we took into consideration too, and we'll have some additional discussions about tonight, because there are regulations that we can change or firm up to try to ensure that carries forward. There are new sections of the document and existing sections that we identified as missing some information, as areas where we could expand and clarify the provisions. For example, the subdivision process, was no information in your land use bylaw about the subdivision process. So we added some information into the land use bylaw that just clarifies what that is and what the administrative process is there if that is undertaken. And then we had to update the appeal process in order to be consistent with the new requirements in the MGA, and provided a little bit of additional clarity about what happens when there's a contravention of the land use bylaw and what the enforcement options are that are available to the municipality. The last two things relate to setback regulations. So in speaking with council and discussing your footprint of your developments today, it came to light that the setback requirements that are in the land use bylaw are not consistent with how development has occurred on the lots. So for example, there's a setback for accessory buildings and a setback between an accessory building and the main building on the lot that are quite large. And it seems like lots within the summer village don't conform to some of those setback requirements. So I'm not sure how that came to be. If some of the developments that are within the municipality predate that land use bylaw and a change happened when the previous land use bylaw was approved, but those are the sorts of things that we were looking at moving forward to see if we could try to correct, to ensure that the existing developments within the community wouldn't all be legal non-conforming developments, and try to establish regulations that were reasonable and achievable on the size of the lots that you have, and taking into consideration some of the physical limitations of the lots as a result of some of your topographical features. The last one relates to bylaw 129, and Summer Village, and you're not the only summer village. There are other summer villages around the lake that have separated some of the development process information from the land use bylaw into a separate development permit bylaw. And I don't know what the origins of that were, but from the perspective of ensuring accessibility and improving transparency, in our opinion, all of that information, or the parts of it that pertain specifically to the administrative part of the development process, belong in the land use bylaw. So we looked at that bylaw, and we took from that bylaw the information that I think is most properly included in a land use bylaw, with the hopes that as we move through this process, we'll be able to repeal this other bylaw and just have everything in one place. The fees and fines information that is in that bylaw will go into your fees bylaw, and then the rest of the procedural stuff will go back into the land use bylaw. So it's all in one place and easier for you to find. So those were some of the things that, just looking at the structure of the document and talking to council and administration, we were able to identify as focuses for this particular review. So in looking at those things and drafting the document, one of the first things we did was rework the structure. We got rid of those schedules. And instead we put everything into the body of the document, except for a couple of appendixes at the end, which are graphics for the most part. At the beginning of the document, we included a guide, and the intention of the guide was to provide just a sort of Coles Notes version of how a land use bylaw works, and to remind people that you need development permits for all development within the municipality, except for a very select and limited list of things that are identified aptly in a section that's called development not requiring a permit, but everything else requires a permit, and advising, I guess, people who are doing development in the community to have a look at the land use bylaw, and if they have any questions, to give Judy a call in the Summer Village office, because that's what she's there for, to help you out. So that's the purpose of the guide, and then we get into the bylaw itself. And the way that it's structured is to have all of the administrative pieces up at the front, and then it's got information about the different types of regulations that apply to how you do development on the lot, and where you put the developments and the types of uses in sections 9 and 10. So at the end of the document, and I'll go through those as we move through the bylaw. So I mentioned what the user guide is about. It's not approved as part of the bylaw. It's just sort of an introduction or an executive summary, I guess, to the document itself that provides some guidance on how to interpret it. The next section, section 1 of the bylaw, which is approved as part of the bylaw, provides some information about when the bylaw comes into effect. It repeals the previous bylaw, and then provides some clarification about what the purpose of a land use bylaw is. And the purpose of the bylaw is to prohibit or regulate and control the use and development of land and buildings within the municipality to achieve the orderly and economic development of land within your community. And that's almost verbatim from the Act. That's what all land use bylaws are intended to do. The next bits there just provide some clarification about the application of the bylaw, conformity, compliance, and then there's a severability clause that we always add as well. Then the second part, interpretation, which is probably one of the most important parts of the bylaw, provides all of the definitions. So we have included a little bit of information about measurements. Metric measurements will be the primary unit of measure that we use for land use bylaw related matters. We do include the imperial measurements too, because I know that lots of people still think in feet. I know that I can visualize what a 50 by 100 foot lot looks like. I can't visualize it when I describe it in meters. I should be able to, but I can't. So they're included for those of you like me that still think about or visualize some of these things in imperial measurements. But where there's discrepancies between the two or rounding issues, the metric will take precedence. As we moved through the definitions, we added a lot. I had mentioned that earlier on. Your existing land use bylaw has 56 defined terms, and we've expanded that significantly. And we went through the document to look at the different terms that are used within the context of the bylaw and have regulations associated with them. And we made sure that those terms are used consistently through the document and that those terms are defined. Because it's, you know, if we're going to talk about a double fronting lot or an interior lot or a corner lot and apply different setback requirements to those different types of lots, then we need to be able to explain to you as the lot owners what we mean when we're using those terms in particular. So we've included definitions for the terms, and then we've also included a number of graphics to help with the interpretation of those terms. Part 3 provides some information about the different roles and responsibilities of the different agencies or authorities that are enabled through the legislation to make decisions relating to land use and land management within the municipality. So there's information there just explaining the roles of the subdivision authority, the development authority, council, and the subdivision and development appeal board, I believe, is in there too. Yeah. Part 4 provides some information about how you would go about making changes to the document. So because it's approved by bylaw, if you want to make changes, they have to be amendments to the bylaw. Then the Municipal Government Act provides the municipalities with a pretty specific set of procedural requirements for going through the process of making changes to a land use bylaw. And for your information, really, that process is almost identical to the process that we undertake when we're doing a new land use bylaw like this project. So there's requirements for engagement with the community. There's requirements for the municipality to give 3 readings of the bylaw and to hold a public hearing prior to consideration of 3rd reading of the bylaw. Normally it's done after 1st reading prior to 2nd reading of the bylaw. The public hearing, if any of you were participated in the municipal development plan approval process, is a little bit different than a meeting like our meeting this evening. Normally, instead of me doing all of the talking or the majority of the talking, it's the opportunity for you to give your testimony to council directly and provide council with your feedback on the things that you approve or disapprove of in the document and would like to see changed prior to their consideration of 2nd and 3rd reading and approving the bylaw. So it's a little bit more formal a process, but it's a very important part of the process. And we're not there yet. We've got certainly a little bit more work to do before we go there, but that would be a requirement for this project, and it would be a requirement for any amendment to the bylaw too. So these land use bylaws are not written in stone. They're intended to be thought of as living documents that can be changed as the need arises. But because they are so important to everybody within the community, there is this process that's in place that all municipalities have to follow to ensure that the community is well advised prior to council giving consideration to any of those proposed amendments. That just gives you a little bit more information about that. And, you know, some of these areas where we've included additional information in the document, it doesn't change the process. The processes are legislative processes. But, you know, I have found over the years that people don't tend to, unless there's a real problem and they're really concerned about whether or not we're doing things the way we should, which sometimes they should be, people don't tend to turn to the legislation for this information. So we've been trying to pull some of that information that talks about what it is that we actually do when we're administering a land use bylaw and put it into the land use bylaw, so we can be a little bit more transparent with you about what happens if you're engaged in any of these processes with the municipality. So you know what happens when you drop off your paper and pay your fee. And what steps the municipality has to go to and go through, just to make it a little bit clear why sometimes it takes so much time to, you know, because there are all of these steps that need to be followed prior to the municipality being able to issue a decision for some things or being able to make a change to the land use bylaw. Part 5, the development process, provides very specific and detailed information about the control of development. So it does in this section provide information about what types of development developments do not require a permit, any development that you undertake within the municipality, be it, construction or changing the use of building or land, requires a development permit unless it's identified in this list. So for the most part, I think the easiest thing to remember is the chances are if you were doing development on your property, you likely need a development permit. You can look at this section and check out the list there of things that don't require a permit to see if it is specifically identified. But if it is not, then you need to give Judy a call. The other thing to note really with this is that even though there is some types of development within the municipality that are identified specifically as things you can do without a development permit, those types of developments, and the ones that I'm thinking about in particular, maybe as an example, are some types of accessory buildings that are under 110 square feet. See, that one's in imperial too, because I can picture that 110 square feet. I can't picture it in meters yet. If you want to put an accessory building, a small accessory building on your property, and it is under or equal to 110 square feet, you still have to ensure that where that accessory building goes on your property is consistent with the setback requirements for accessory buildings in that section of the bylaw. So you can't exceed the height requirements, and it can't be too close to a side, rear, or front property line. If you want to put it in a location that's inconsistent with those requirements, then you need a permit and you need to request a variance to those provisions. So that's something to keep in mind, is that even those developments that don't require a development permit still have to be constructed and located on the lot in a manner that's consistent with the regulations in the land use bylaw. The only difference is you don't need the permit from Judy, but you still have to comply to those requirements. This section provides information about what we do and how we address non-conforming buildings or uses. For your, I think the terminology that people are most familiar when we're talking about non-conforming buildings and uses are grandfathering. Technically, it's talking about non-conforming buildings or uses, but it's the provisions in there just talk about what happens if you have a structure on your property that you had a permit for in the past and the bylaw changed and now it doesn't comply with the current requirements. That structure is allowed to remain in its current location and current form until such time as you go to change it. So that's a legal non-conforming use. If the bylaw changes, your building is still okay until such time as you go to do something different to it. And then once you go to change that development, then there's a requirement to bring the building into compliance. So if you do a new development needs to comply to the rules of the day. For those existing developments that were built on a lot legally, so that means with the permits that they needed to have, they get to remain. A new bylaw coming into effect doesn't create a problem for you if you had permits for the development that's on your lot today. This section provides information about application requirements, and we have expanded that quite substantially to provide a little bit more clarity about the types of things that the Development Authority may ask for at time of development permit application. And there are some things I think that it was unclear about before that may be requirements for new development or redevelopment on a parcel. And there's some things that we ask for on some lots that we don't ask for on other lots. And it tends to be related specifically to the specific site features. So for example, if you have a lot that has a slope on it somewhere that is greater than 15%, chances are the development officer is going to ask you to do a geotechnical report as part of your development permit application to demonstrate that where you want to put that building on the lot isn't going to create slope instability, and it's not going to slide down that steep slope. There are other summer villages, there isn't, I don't believe, in your municipality, where there are lots that have very high water table issues. And in those situations, we may also ask for some geotechnical information to provide information about the water table to ensure that the new development that goes up, which is often a substantial development, is happening in a way that isn't going to be problematic for that new development down the road. So when the Development Authority is reviewing applications, they have to have as part of that application package sufficient information to be able to determine that the development that's being proposed is suitable for the site that it's intended to be developed on. And if we know, and we do have some information now, that the lot that is subject to the application has some specific constraints or hazard lands, then the Development Authority is obligated to ask for additional information to make sure that everything is designed and engineered in such a way as to not create a problem for that lot owner and developer, or the adjacent properties, which does happen from time to time, and then the municipality is on the hook for the OOPs. So there's a bit more information about what those types of things would be, so that it's a little clearer for you as a developer or landowner that this might be triggered depending on specific features on your property. We added an additional section 2 that talks about permission for development, and a new section that talks about how we will provide notice of complete or incomplete applications. And some of this stuff is really dull and it seems kind of silly, and it's in here because it has to be in here. Some of the changes or amendments to the Municipal Government Act that came into effect over the last few years have necessitated some of these changes. This notice of complete or incomplete applications, we are now required upon receiving an application to provide notice to the applicant in writing in a form that's identified in the land use bylaw specifically, so it's got to be in here, of whether or not the application has been deemed complete or incomplete. And if it is incomplete, we have to identify which parts of the application are missing and identify the time frame that the applicant has to complete that application. And if they don't provide the missing components of the application within the time frame identified in the notice, then the application is deemed refused. And we don't have any choice about that. That's something that is now in the Municipal Government Act, and we have to address through the land use bylaw. So that's one of those things that I mentioned that was an administrative functional change that happened as a result of changes to the legislation that we needed to update the land use bylaw to make consistent with the legislation. That not being in your land use bylaw did not change the fact that Judy had to do it anyway. We still have to make sure that procedurally we're consistent with the requirements in the legislation, but it was not transparent. It was because it wasn't in your land use bylaw, and the process in the land use bylaw is different than what the legislative process is. It was a little bit confusing, is misleading. So that's something that we've corrected in this document. We also provided some more information about how notice of a decision will be issued, and then provided a bit more clarity about the types of conditions that may be required, including development agreements with an approval of an application. The validity of permits section or subsection that's in here was there before. The other, I think, major change that I'd like to draw your attention to, because I think it's important you have a look at, is the variance section, which we have expanded a fair bit. It's just a short section, but it's a really important section. Variances are when you want to do a development on your property, but the development that you want to do does not comply with the requirements in the land use bylaw in terms of siting. Most of the time it's siting on the lot. The municipality, the development authority, can vary the provisions in the land use bylaw if you request a variance. But there are some things that they have to take into consideration when they're looking at and making a decision about those variances, and they are not obligated to approve a request for a variance. So in the existing land use bylaw, there's no parameters around what types of variances the municipality might approve and when they may not approve it. So it's really, sort of open-ended and unclear. The only direction that's there is it's not in the land use bylaw, it's in the Municipal Government Act, which indicates that no municipality can vary the use that's provided for in the district. So what you want to do is not a permitted or discretionary use in the district. It cannot be approved. It's not variable. But anything else, as long as it doesn't unduly interfere with the use and enjoyment of adjacent properties, could be considered by the municipality. Most municipalities will establish some upper limits on the types of variances that they will consider, especially around the lakes. The things that we have identified through discussions with council as requests for variances that council would not like the development authority to consider are things like variances relating to fence height or building height, or variance requested to exceed the maximum lot coverage for development on a property. So this is new, and I want to flag it because if you have concerns about it, we need to know about it. But we've added this upper limit to the types of things that the municipality may consider varying and what they will not consider varying, and that's what's been added to the document right now. There's a list on the side there that just identifies some of the types of developments that would not require a permit. I would recommend too that you have a look at that section as well, and just be aware of those things. And if you have any questions or concerns about any of those, please also feel free to contact Brad or I, and we can talk about some of those and provide some information about why things are listed or not listed. And if you have any concerns, convey those to council and administration too. Part 6, the subdivision process, that's the part that the bylaw that I was indicating was entirely new. And it doesn't change what the procedural requirements are. It just tries to bring them into the bylaw so that it's a little bit easier for the community to know what's going on when a subdivision application is applied for, and what the legislative requirements are from the municipality's perspective when we're moving through those processes. Part 7 deals with subdivision and development appeals. And it just provides more detailed information than there was before about who can appeal and when, what the process is for initiating an appeal for a subdivision or development permit decision. Provides information about the legislative requirements for the time frame, so for getting that appeal initiated and for when the appeal is held and from when the decision of the appeal board is issued. All of those timelines are legislative. And it also provides some information about how we determine the correct appeal body. So until the Red Tape Reduction Act came into effect 2 years ago, approximately, it used to be that for the last many years, that development permit appeals were heard specifically by the local subdivision and development appeal board, and only by the local subdivision and development appeal board. Subdivision appeals could be heard by the municipal government board, which was the province, or the local subdivision and development appeal board, depending on whether or not there was a provincial interest in the application. This, I think, is the most substantive change to the legislation. With these changes to the legislation that came into effect, there are some types of development permit applications that will be, when appealed, heard by the province. The province has changed the name of the appeal body that hears appeals. Instead of the municipal government board, they're now called the Land and Property Rights Tribunal, and they're a quasi-judicial entity. And they do now hear both subdivision and development appeals in some situations where the province is deemed there is a provincial interest. So that's, I think, worth noting, is that has come into effect. It's been in effect for a little while, and it does change the appeal process for development permits. So we've updated those sections in order to update and make sure that that information is correctly presented. Enforcement. So we're almost at the end of the administrative stuff, which is super boring. I apologize, but also very important. The enforcement section just provides information about what types of enforcement actions are available for municipalities when they're dealing with a situation where there is a development or use on a piece of land that does not comply with the land use bylaw. So it identifies specifically the actions that the development officer can take to enforce regulations in the land use bylaw, or to enforce conditions on the approval for a development permit application. It provides information about the rights that the development officer has to inspect or enter a property to ensure compliance, and then it provides a little bit of detailed information about what steps or actions can be taken to try and resolve the non-compliance issue. And municipalities are kind of limited in the types of steps that they can take in order to bring a non-complying property into compliance, which is one of the things that I think people find the most frustrating about land use bylaws, is that we go through all of this process and we establish these sets of rules and regulations, and then they're hard to enforce. And it's true, they are hard to enforce. They are enforceable, but there's not great ways of doing it that are cost effective for municipalities. So big municipalities find it a little easier to do some of these things sometimes than small municipalities, because of the cost associated with going through the courts to be able to enact a stop order. We do have mechanisms that we can use, but they're a little bit costly. And smaller municipalities often just don't have as much enforcement capacity as some of the larger municipalities. So municipalities, even the big municipalities, do not, generally speaking, go looking for land use bylaw infraction issues. Nobody does that. But when they are reported to them, they do have to take action. Once they become aware of a contravention issue, the municipality is obligated to do something about it. So that's when they start moving through some of these processes to take action, because once they know they have to do something, and then they have to take one of the steps that's available to them. So your municipality can issue violation tags. They can't issue tickets because you have to have a peace officer to do that. they can also issue stop orders. And that, I think, is generally what ends up happening. Most of the time, what happens is a municipality will give you a call and say, hey, it's come to our attention that, can you please do something about this? And then if it isn't corrected, they'll send a warning letter. And if an action isn't taken to remedy the situation, they'll issue a stop order. And that happens in large part, without going through the step of issuing a violation tag, because compliance or payment for those violation tags is voluntary. So sometimes it just delays the municipality's ability to take the enforcement action that will get the remedy that they need in place. Sometimes when you're a small municipality, it just makes more sense to go right to the stop order, because it can shave a year off of getting to the correction of the contravention, but it also is expensive. All right, that's through the boring administrative stuff. And now I'm into the regulations. So your land use bylaw, because it's a much more, this draft land use bylaw, sophisticated document than the previous one, but it's still a small land use bylaw, right? It doesn't include anywhere near the number of regulations that we would include in a land use bylaw for a town, and certainly not for a city or anything like that. And that's because it should be appropriate to the scale of your municipality. And it only needs to address the types of developments that you either have and wish to have within your municipality, or don't have and don't want to have within your municipality. For example, the keeping of livestock. We have provisions in the land use bylaw that deal with that specifically to be able to prohibit or prevent that from occurring, because it doesn't make sense within your community. So there isn't a ton of regulations that we have added that deal specifically with different types of uses. For the most part, the regulations deal with uses that could happen on almost any lot, or they deal specifically with how the development will be situated and designed on the property. But there are a few in this section too that deal with specific defined uses like guest house suites or CCANs, solar energy collection systems, wind energy collection systems, those sorts of things, home occupations. The others could apply to any lot at time of development anywhere, just about. So we have highlighted a few of these specifically for discussion tonight, because I think they're the ones where there are the most substantial changes or the content is entirely new. And I want to make sure that as you're doing your review of the document, we flag these in particular for your consideration and review, so that you can provide us with your thoughts about how we've handled some of these things. A number of them have been implemented in order to affect or implement the recommendations in the Pigeon Lake Watershed Management Plan, and what has been included from that document forwarded into your municipal development plan. In order to implement some of those things, it specifically needs to be tied back to or related to how development is designed on a lot. So there aren't, we haven't done things in the land use bylaw that would prohibit development, but we have effectively changed how the development could happen in some instances on lots to minimize negative impacts on water quality specifically. So let me take you through some of these. The first one relates to the accessory buildings and uses section. So one of the changes that we wanted to flag for the community for your input specifically is that we have identified a maximum number of accessory buildings that would be allowed to be located on a lot. So your main building, which is identified on that figure there as a dwelling, so it'd be a house or a cottage, is the gray building, and you can only have one of those on a property. That's the case today. And then we've just set an upper threshold for how many supporting or accessory buildings you can also have in a lot. And the number that we've established right now is 3. We've also indicated that in the front yard on the lakefront lot, the maximum number of accessory buildings that you could have in that location is 1. And the reason we've established a maximum number of accessory buildings on the lake side of the lot, well, there's 2 reasons for it. One of them is to try and minimize the amount of non-permeable surface on that side of the lot, because that's the area that's closest to the lake, and we want to minimize the direct runoff coming off of the lot going into the lake to try to protect the lake water quality. The other reason is to try and minimize negative impacts associated with obstructions of your view. If there's a lakefront lot, one of the I guess, valuable things about the lakefront lots is the beautiful view of the lake. And so we wanted to try and ensure that as redevelopment happens on these lots, development is happening in a way that is consistent with what things and views exist today. So those are two things that I think are worth flagging for you so that you're aware of them and you can provide us with your input about. Brian, you had a comment in the chat there that said we jumped from section 7 to 9. Is there an 8? Let me just have a look here.
Jane, I think it was just misnumbered. Enforcement should be 8.
Yep. Subdivision and development appeals was 7. Enforcement should be 8. Thanks for flagging that, Brian. Yeah, and then we're into 9. So it was there. It was misnumbered. Our apologies for that. This is a drawing that is in your existing land use bylaw, but we've rebuilt it, added a little bit of color to it, and tried to provide a little bit more clarification. There was a few numbers on this diagram that were misleading, so we've deleted those that were misleading and made sure that the diagram is consistent with the written provisions that are in section 9.1. So those, all of the numbers on the diagram and all of the numbers in the regulations in 9.1 now match. This is, I think, a little bit of an easier way to picture or visualize how and where accessory buildings can be situated on a lot, especially when we're dealing with a summer village or a lake community where what the front yard is flips depending on where you are. So specifically, if you are a lot that is adjacent to the lake, so on the lake side, your front yard is the lake side. If you are a back lot, your front yard is the side that abuts the road. So it flips on those different lots. And we wanted to be able to identify that so you could visualize it and then show where the accessory buildings could be located and what the required setbacks are depending on the orientation of the garage doors, which changes what the setback requirements are for those types specifically of accessory buildings. So this diagram, have a peek at that and let us know whether or not this is helpful, or if there are things about it that are problematic or unclear, and we can make adjustments to that diagram as well. 9.4, I wanted to flag for you. I'm not going to go through all of the different sections in part 9, but I wanted to go through these specifically. This is a new section, and it was included in order to fulfill the municipality's obligations through their approval of the watershed management plan and the policy direction in the MDP. The regulations in this section are intended to prohibit the disturbance of watercourses, wetlands, and water bodies, to outline when and where a wetland assessment might be required as part of a development permit application for redevelopment. And I don't think that applies very much to you guys. It does to some other municipalities we work with. And if your boundary ever changed, it could apply to you. So we added it. It outlines permit requirements for shoreline modifications. Part of the permitting for shoreline modification, as you know, would come through Alberta Environment. But there are also some things that the municipality would like to regulate or require to, and they are identified in this document. We've got regulations that discourage non-vegetative shoreline modifications except for erosion protection, and then some prohibitions that would restrict adding sand adjacent to the bend shore of the lake. There's also some regulations specifically that relate to the design of shoreline modifications, and those specifically address incorporating revegetation and the use of soft landscaping elements, incorporating low impact development strategies, and minimizing the use of hard landscaping elements. And I warned you there was a little bit of planning jargon. There it is. Shoreline modification means any activity or modification that alters the shoreline, and it includes things like placing sand or removing rocks and vegetation or armoring with riprap or vegetative riprap. So those sorts of things. Retaining walls would also be included in that. Soft landscaping elements are vegetation, but they're not limited to things like grass and hedges and ground cover. Trees also can be included in soft landscaping elements, and hard landscaping elements are those things that are non-permeable. So that's maybe the easiest way to think about the difference between the two is soft landscaping elements allow the ground to continue to be permeable and absorb water, which can then be filtered before it enters the lake. The hard landscaping elements are non-permeable surfaces, and they include things like ceramics or brick or concrete or marble. and retaining walls. And they're a little bit more problematic within those very sensitive riparian areas because they don't allow for the water to be absorbed before it enters the lake. They contribute to more direct surface water runoff entering the lake without the water being able to be filtered and the bad stuff being removed before it goes in. So those are some of the considerations and regulations that have been added in that section. In section 9.5, we have some provisions that deal with erosion and sediment control specifically. So this is a new section 2. And what this is intended to do is to just get people to think about when they're doing redevelopment of their lots, how they're going to control the runoff and minimize the conveyance of sediment or pollutants towards the lake during construction and then after the development occurs on the site. And they don't need to be expensive plans, the sediment or erosion and sediment control plans. You know, your plan for how you're going to deal with sediment and managing runoff could very well be that you know, during the construction stage, you have some silt bags set up to stop the direct runoff from entering the lake, or provide some information about where, if you're digging a basement or foundation, the water is going to be or not the water, the dirt is going to be stockpiled during the construction stage before it gets spread back out on the property and regraded and then re-landscaped. So it's, you know, it's things that you think would be kind of intuitive, but we haven't done necessarily when we're doing development. And I don't know that there are things that would necessarily be required if you were doing development away from the lake, but they're really important little design elements that we can add or considerations during construction that we can implement to try and minimize the negative impacts during those different phases of development on a lot. So have a look at that section 2 and let us know if you have any questions. It isn't intended to be overly arduous or difficult. It is intended to provide some specific information about the types of things that we would like people to be thinking about when they go through the redevelopment process to try and minimize those impacts. Similar to that piece, section 9.7 provides some information about the requirements for development permit when we're doing grading or stripping on lots to control drainage. So there is now a requirement for development permit when lot grading or drainage is occurring on a lot. And we've tried to, in this section, provide a little bit more detailed information about what that is intended to entail. So we're moving, depositing, storing, or removing topsoil, or we're stripping, grading, putting up a new dwelling, undertaking landscaping that would affect the natural drainage on the lot. Those are the types of activities that would trigger the need for a development permit. If you are, you know, doing some beautiful landscaping on your property that includes small raised beds or, you know, regular types of landscaping, and it isn't affecting the contours of your property or diverting surface water runoff from your property in a different direction onto an adjacent property, onto municipal property or towards the lake, then we don't care about any of those things. I mean, that's regular ways that people use and enjoy and beautify their properties. Where we want to make sure that we're taking a little bit of extra care and the municipality is providing a bit of input or feedback is when larger earthworks types of activities are occurring on a lot that could inadvertently affect either drainage towards the water or towards the road, towards the ditch, or bugger up the ditch, which happens from time to time, or as a result of a major infill type of development, change the elevations on the lot in such a way that it creates flooding issues for the adjacent property. So we can't, you know, now that the community is developed, the lots are registered, go back and retroactively develop a stormwater management plan. What we can do is start on a lot by lot basis to think about these things at time of redevelopment, then just ensure that we're tying into existing grades and we're directing water in an appropriate way that doesn't, you know, create hardship for our neighbors or create problems for the municipality in terms of the only existing stormwater infrastructure that the municipality has, which is for the most part, you know, drainage, swales, and ditches. We have to be really mindful of those things because any of the other solutions, which would be engineered solutions, would be much more expensive, and they're not something that I think the municipality or you want to entertain at this time. So it's putting the responsibility on the individual landowners at time of redevelopment to think about some of these things, but it really is the most cost-effective way to deal with it. And if we're just a little bit more purposeful in the way that we design and contour and grade our properties, we can prevent or mitigate some of the issues that we've been seeing everywhere in older communities as they redevelop. So this is a teaching from other places where we've had big problems, trying to implement a solution that will make it so you can use and enjoy and redevelop your property in a lovely way that doesn't make it so you and your neighbors become worst enemies. All right, this is one of our poll slides. Right now, in your existing land use bylaw, the municipality allows a guest house suite. And I want to clarify what that means, because the definition of a guest house in your existing land use bylaw means a permanent accessory building which has sleeping accommodations and may have a bathroom, but does not have a cooking facility, and is not intended to be used as a self-contained dwelling, but to provide overflow accommodation for the main dwelling. So it's essentially a bunkhouse. It could be a bunkhouse with a bathroom, but it's a bunkhouse. It does not have cooking facilities, any cooking facilities. And that's what you allow today. So you just allow this overflow accommodation in an accessory building. So we, in discussing this with council, one of the things that council wanted us to look at doing is to not allow any guest house suites within the municipality. So that means that we would not allow an accessory building that includes a bathroom and sleeping accommodations on the property. And we need to know what your thoughts are about that. So Brad, do you want to take over for a second?
Yeah, I will try and launch the poll here now.
And this is one of these things where, because we have pretty low attendance today, you know, it is what it is. But if there is, if you have the opportunity to speak to your neighbors about this and let them know that this is something that's being contemplated, and ask them to provide us with their input on how they feel about guest houses, that would be really beneficial for us, because the more information we can get directly from the community, the easier it'll be for council to make a decision about how they want to proceed with this. We'll give you just a few minutes to go through that.
Jane, we had a question just asking whether this was coming as a result of complaints from neighbors or guidance from other municipalities.
It's definitely not coming from other municipalities. Each of the different summer villages is handling this differently around the lake. So it's something that came up through our conversations with council, and I'm not sure. I don't know if there were complaints. It's not something that's been expressed to me or specifically. So I don't think so. I think there's some concern about how much of the lot is being developed, and changing the character of the community, because it's your pretty quaint little community, right? With smaller lots than many of the other summer villages, and the scale of the buildings and lot coverage. So the massing of the development on the site is quite different than some of the other places. And I think the concern was coming from that. When we get into the conversation about RVs, which is coming, I know it's related to that as well, is how much development on the lot, how much increased population on the lot is appropriate for your quiet little, you know, summer village.
Yeah.
And I don't have an answer. You know, this has got to be something that the community speaks to. Because there's no right or wrong. There's just right or wrong for you. One of the things that has arisen in other communities is Airbnbs, and that's not something that's been a problem in your community.
So I don't have an option to display the results. I'm not sure, Jana, on your end if they're showing.
Yes, they are. Okay.
So I'm assuming everyone can see, but if not, for the question, should the summer village allow for the development? That is a 2/3 yes, 4 out of 6. And if guest house suites are allowed, should they be allowed to include a kitchen? And that is almost the majority saying no.
Entirely the majority, 5 out of 6.
Yeah.
Said no. So it sort of sounds like with the few of you that we have today, the feedback is pretty consistent with what's currently in your land use bylaw.
I think it's worth noting too, this is not a referendum or any sort of official voting on the subject, but it does provide us a little bit of guidance.
Yeah, and if you can speak to your neighbors and get more of your neighbors to provide some input in this regard to it, would be really helpful for us, because it will enable us to convey back to council and administration what more of the community feels is appropriate in your community in regards to this type of development. Oh, mine gives me the ability to share results. I wonder if it just went to me, Brad. Did that pop
Okay.
up for everybody? Sylvia, can you see that? Oh, you're muted.
Hi, sorry, I think I pressed something that I didn't. I apologize. Sorry.
No problem. I'm going to hit stop sharing with that.
Okay.
And I'm just going to close it. Brad, did the poll disappear?
It's showing on my end, but I think we can close out of it and move along.
Okay, thank you. So that's, I want to flag that one in particular for you because we had lots of discussion about it. And I think it's something that there will be some continued discussion about moving forward with council. So the more input we can get from members of the community about that, the better, because that will help council in their discussions and deliberations. Moving buildings. So this section used to be more specifically moved in buildings, but the municipality has had issues with buildings coming in and buildings going out, impacting municipal infrastructure, which most specifically means the roads. So one of the things we need to regulate or be able to control with moved in buildings is the appearance of those buildings and determine whether or not they meet current code requirements so they're safe to be in the community. And there have always been provisions in your land use bylaw that enable the development officer to require a building that's being moved in to be inspected or improved prior to landing on the site. What we tried to do here too, just to protect the municipality's roads, which are the most expensive piece of infrastructure for the most part that the municipality has to maintain, is to enable the municipality to require a bond if a building is being moved in or being moved out, so that if there is damage to the road, then the municipality has some money to cover some of the costs to repair that damage. So that's something we wanted to just identify for you too, because that is a bit of a change, but I think it's a beneficial and important one too. If we don't get the developer to cover the costs of that, then it will be you as the taxpayers who have to do it. All right, here's the next one that I think is a pretty controversial one. I want to talk about recreational vehicles and how many and how they can be used on a lot is something that every municipality that we worked with, not just summer villages, even counties and towns over the last 5 years has really had strong feelings about, and generally not a consensus opinion about, because the way they are utilized within the different communities and by different people within the same communities is not the same. So the current regulations in your land use bylaw relating to recreational vehicles, and what we're talking about really are RVs, campers, trailers, those sorts of things, not boats or ATVs or anything like that. We're talking about campers. It says that recreational vehicles shall not be used as a primary dwelling on a property. So you can't have one if you don't have a cottage or a house on there. They can only be on a lot that is already developed with a dwelling. So they can't be the dwelling unless you have a permit for one to be on the lot while you're doing construction. And in order for that to happen, you have to have a permit for it. If there is an RV on a lot, you can have one up to a maximum of 14 days without a permit. If it remains longer than 14 days, you need a permit for it, an annual development permit, and it has to specifically identify how you're going to deal with your wastewater. So if you're going to use it for more than 14 days on the property, it has to be properly connected to a wastewater system on the property. There's another provision in your existing land use bylaw, and the way that it's written, it was unclear to us how it's intended to be interpreted, that says one RV may be stored on site with a development permit. So I think that the wording is problematic because it's unclear whether or not that one RV that can be stored on the lot is in addition to the RV that can be there for 14 days without a permit or for more than 14 days with a permit. And that needs to be clarified. So if nothing else changes, we need to clarify whether or not you can have one RV for storage and then an additional RV that somebody can be in for some time period, because I don't know how to read that. And if I don't know how to read that, then other people are going to have trouble with it too. The current provisions indicate that when you have an RV, it has to be located in the rear of the lot. So it's not supposed to be located in the front driveway, it's supposed to be in the rear of the lot. And that's to ensure or to try to, unless you're a lakefront lot, minimize the appearance of the RVs in the community so it doesn't look or feel campgroundy. When you drive in, it just looks quaint and cottagey. And I think that is the idea for that design mitigation. And I'm speculating a bit here because it's been there for a while. There is a provision that allows for additional RVs for extraordinary events with a temporary development permit that identifies the time frame when they have to be removed by. And it also indicates that any RV that's on a property is subject to the moved in or out building regulations. So it has to be up to a certain standard when it moves in. Now, we had lots of discussion about this with council and whether or not those provisions were enabling too much RVs, too many RVs, or how we needed to deal with it. So the option that we had proposed to council, and I don't think council sold on this right now, is just some tweaks to the existing provisions that clarify that you still can't live in an RV. You still have to have a dwelling on the lot before you can have one, unless you have a permit for the RV during construction. It would limit the number of RVs on any lot to one without a development permit. We were recommending that one RV that's on the lot not require a permit, regardless of whether or not it's being stored on the site or it's being used for guests. Council wasn't sure about that. They were concerned that it would essentially become a second dwelling on the site, and I think that's a valid consideration. We had indicated that the placement of the RV on the lot must comply with site coverage and setback requirements for an accessory building, which I think helps mitigate some of the negative impacts that you could have on an adjacent property owner if the RV is there and being used and is very, very close to the property line. It could be close to the neighbor's cottage or home. And then we indicated here that one additional RV may be parked or occupied on a lot up to 3 days without a development permit or up to 14 days with a development permit. So maximum number of RVs in this scenario would be 2, 1 year round, 1 for up to a maximum of 3 days with no permit, 14 days with a permit. Similarly to the existing provisions, we had indicated that it must be located within the rear of the lot and entirely within the boundaries of the lot, so it can't be in the road or the ditch, and that there was the ability to apply for a development permit, a temporary development permit for an additional RV for an extraordinary event, say like a wedding, and similarly that it would be subject to the same provisions as any other type of building for moved in or out buildings. So that provided a little bit more clarification. We thought that would be a little bit easier to regulate and enforce. But it does potentially increase the number of RVs allowed on a lot from 1 to 2, depending on how those provisions had been interpreted previously in the existing land use bylaw. The other scenario that was proposed was to restrict RVs on the lot. So we had discussions about whether or not it was appropriate to have any RVs on the lot at any time, or whether or not we needed to clarify and restrict the number of RVs to 1 and only to let it be there for a very short period of time. So I think we spent, I don't even know how much time we spent. When I went back and listened to our conversation, it was a long time talking about this. And I don't think there was a consensus decision from council about how they wanted to proceed. And they had requested that we flag this one for our engagement too. So Brad, I'll turn it over to you to do the next poll. And I really, I guess I would encourage you to think about this one and provide us with your input too, because I think it could impact the way that you are using and enjoying your property. And we want to make sure that we're doing this right.
Yeah, these poll questions are a combination of what is happening right now in the Summer Village and also what your thoughts are on some of the regulations that Jane was talking about. So again, this is just for information purposes. It is not looking to get a specific direction on which way to go. So the first question is, do you store or keep an RV on your lot? And these answers kind of range from whether it's a year-round thing, during the summer months only, winter only, perhaps. The only RV on your lot might be when a guest comes to visit, or never. And if you do, how many? And then there are 2 questions about potential regulations that could be added that talk about where on a lot an RV may be kept, and if it would be on a hard surface or otherwise.
So you just have to scroll down to get to those other questions. I think they're all in the tiny little box.
For the second question, it requires you to pick one or a number, even though the first question says if you do you store an RV? So it seems like a flawed question.
If you keep an RV on your lot, how many? The second question, that one?
Yeah, so I don't keep an RV on my lot, but I couldn't hit 0 or not applicable.
Oh, then just don't answer that one.
Yeah, we can record that. Yeah,
You are correct. That is flawed.
You have to answer it to submit the questionnaire.
It won't let you do it.
Yeah.
Oh, it won't let you carry on.
if you select more than 2, we'll just subtract that from
I
the
definitely
total.
selected one and submitted. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
Brad.
okay, no, that's fine too.
I think this is one potentially of the more significant changes to the bylaw that's being contemplated. So it's something I'm going to have a conversation with council and administration about whether or not we should just do a short questionnaire that we post on the Summer Villages website so that we can try to get more input from the community. Because I do think it is impactful for people.
I think we have everyone who would be answering questions with responses, so I'll just end the poll now.
Sounds good.
Just sharing results.
So it's pretty diverse, even with the small group of people that we have. You want to read through those, Brad?
Yeah, I was just recording them in case for some reason we lose them. So when it came to do you store or keep an RV on your lot, 2 folks indicated no, except when guest visits, and 3 indicated no, never. So there was 1 who indicated yes, and that was a year-round situation. Half, subtracting the one that we know about, if you keep an RV in your lot, how many? And half indicated 1, and 1/3, 33% indicated more than 2.
But that's probably, not right,
Yep.
because 3 said no, never. So we'll ignore
Yep.
that one for now.
Yeah,
'cause it's
well, we can do the math on that one. Do you support adding regulations that would limit the placement of an RV on a lot to hard surface only? Example, a driveway or a pad. 2/3 indicated no, and 1/3 said yes. And how many RVs should be allowed on a lot in the Summer Village? 1/3 was 0, half was 1, and another individual indicated 1, but with the opportunity for 1 more temporarily.
So you guys are just like council. They're kind of split. So thank you for that. I think it just indicates to us that the opinions about RVs throughout the community there isn't a consensus opinion about that, which is consistent with the information we've received so far. So I think this is going to be one that's a little bit tricky to arrive at a decision about. But it's something that we need to try and communicate to folks within the community, because it's something that may change as we move through this process. So the next one is secans, and we wanted
Sorry,
to,
Jane, I'm just finishing handwriting these just in case.
oh, can you see it still, Brad?
Yes.
Okay, and so if I move along?
Yeah, I think you're good.
Okay, thank you. So secans, there weren't specific regulations that clarified how, if secans could be used on a lot. So we've tried to provide a little bit of additional clarification about that. Secan can't be used as a principal building, dwelling, or guest house. We're not going to allow guest houses. That we have a non-issue, but we wanted to put that in there for the time being because I don't think there's a decision about that entirely yet. They can't be, they'll only be allowed on a temporary basis as a temporary accessory building in order to store materials and during construction because they are secure. And that seems to be one of the reasons that they're utilized on properties quite regularly, is to store those construction materials in, especially if you're building on a seasonal property and you're not there all the time. We've limited the maximum number of secans to 1, and we've indicated they can't be in the front yard of any lot. The maximum height can be 3 meters or 10 feet, so 1 secan. And the development authority may require buffering or aesthetic improvements to conform to the appearance of buildings in the immediate area. So they're pretty restrictive when it comes to secans. Some municipalities allow a secan for storage, kind of like a shed. When we're talking about secans and regulating secans, thank you, Brian, we'll catch that. We're not talking about the use of secans as a construction material for a different end use, if that makes sense. There is a hotel in Bruderheim that's constructed out of secans. They use secans as one of the building materials when they were constructing the hotel, and instead of stick built, they used the metal from the secans. And that's not a secan at the end of the day. At the end of the day, that's a hotel where they've used secans for the construction. I know that there are some types of tiny homes or accessory buildings that are utilized. They use secans, which they've repurposed and changed their structure to be a different type of end use. If the secan is utilized in that way as a construction material, then what we'll look at is what the end use is and what type of a building it is at the end of the day in relation to building and safety code requirements. So we're not intending to prohibit the use of secans as a construction material. We are intending to regulate and prohibit the placement of secans like that little blue box on a property, if that makes sense. The next section deals with site coverage and landscaping requirements. And this is addressed in the existing land use bylaw, but we've made some significant, I think, adjustments to this. We've required development permits for landscaping that would alter the natural drainage pattern on the lot, or that could impact the quantity or quality of the runoff from the lot entering towards the lake or towards the ditch or towards an adjacent property. And we've indicated that if you're doing a substantial enough landscaping that it does affect the natural drainage pattern, then you may be required to submit with your development permit application a landscaping plan that provides information about what types of stripping and grading activities are being proposed for the lot. If the development permit application also includes new buildings, it would identify where the new buildings are going, or provide information about redevelopment of existing buildings so we can see how the entire site would be affected, and how the drainage pattern is proposed for the lot once the construction is complete. So we've identified in this section what the specific requirements would be for a landscaping plan. So it's a little easier. If we're going to ask you for the thing, we need to clarify what it is we're looking at in particular. And what we're trying to figure out with this sort of planning requirement, development permit requirement, is how much of the surface of the lot will be affected by the landscaping in terms of changing the percentages of permeable and non-permeable surface on the lot, because that affects the quantity and the quality of the runoff. And then we need information about elevations, post-construction elevations. So these are things that would be normal requirements in any urban area. And even though it's the cottage or the lake, right, they are small lots, they are urban sized lots. And if we mess this up, we really can cause harm for our neighbors, because we can inadvertently direct water towards an adjacent property in a way that creates flooding issues. And it's been happening, unfortunately, everywhere throughout the last little while, because these lots, because of the age of the lots, they were not required to include as part of their registration post-construction lot grading plans. So there isn't registered with the lots information about what those post-construction elevations need to be. And so we have to do a little bit more work at time of redevelopment to make sure that we're tying into existing grades and we're directing water in the right way. And where we run into problems is where we haven't asked for that information. And we've just said, oh, right, you can't redirect water off of your property onto your neighbors, but we haven't required a corresponding plan. And so the development has occurred, the damage is done, and then dealing with the enforcement is really difficult. And costly for the landowner who did it. So we're trying to get some of this more detailed planning work done up front, so everybody knows and there's an agreement about what's going to happen. So you only end up having to do it once. In terms of site coverage and landscaping, which I've been coming at, all of these things are related. We've identified a maximum lot coverage percentages for different types of development that occur on the lot. So I think your existing land use bylaw has a maximum building pocket area for the buildings themselves. The change that's being proposed here is to also include the non-permeable surfaces in that lot coverage percentage, so that we can try to minimize the runoff that is leaving the lot going toward the lake, the road, and the adjacent properties. So what's been proposed here, and we looked at when we were doing this, because we were trying to be very mindful of the size of your lots. The smallest lot in the summer village, and Brian claims that's his, and he might be right, to see what was realistic. So if we didn't want to implement percentages here that were unachievable, or would result in a situation where you couldn't continue to develop or redevelop in a manner that's consistent with the existing built form of the community. And what we arrived at were these numbers. So we had Allison draw these out, sketch them out, and see what would work and what wouldn't be too restrictive. We've identified 40% of the lot that can be covered in buildings. 10% in addition to that can be covered in non-permeable surfaces. That could be driveway or patio stones, something that's non-permeable at all. And then there's a requirement for 30% of the lot to be covered in vegetation, including trees and shrubs. And that's because the trees and shrubs are really important for maintaining water quality. Our very beautiful lawns are not super effective filters. So we have to have a mixture of trees and shrubs and other types of vegetation in order to ensure that water absorption is happening on the lot. And then we've identified a flex areas. So it's entirely up to you how you want to deal with those areas in order to ensure that we're not being too prescriptive in these requirements. But this is definitely a change from the way that this was approached before. The drawing on the left there is, I believe, essentially to scale. Allison tried to do that when she was putting together the drawing, so you can see what that might look like on the lot. And that's just an example, but it does still provide for a reasonably sized dwelling and garage and a driveway, and it does identify still a significant portion of the lot, 30%, that would be maintained in vegetative and tree cover. So have a look at that too, and think about your lot and what your development or redevelopment plans are, and let us know if you have any concerns with that and what's being proposed there. This is something that we're working on implementing throughout the summer villages around the lake. So this is something that we're hoping will be consistently implemented in all of the summer villages with different numbers that are appropriate for the different lot sizes. But we're trying to implement this because it was one of the recommendations through the watershed management plan. All right, we're almost through. This section here deals with tree removal, and it's also related to the landscaping requirements. One of the things that we found is that If we minimize the amount of tree clearing on a lot, that's one of the most effective ways to manage and slow down surface water runoff. You and your municipality have always had provisions related to restricting or regulating tree removal. There's a caveat registered on the lots that prohibits the removal of evergreen and birch trees. Those caveats are a little bit difficult to enforce for the municipality from time to time. So we've taken the information from that caveat and we've included it in the land use bylaw as well, which makes it a little bit easier for the municipality to address and communicate to anyone who wants to do development, and then address the enforcement, because we can apply conditions to development permits that protect those trees too. So this is just taking something that you've done in the past and bringing it forward into the land use bylaw. We have added some additional provisions that relate to tree removal, requiring a development permit so that we can ensure that that caveat is protected and the evergreens and birches that are supposed to remain. We've also indicated or provided for situations where you have to remove mature trees in order to be able to develop or redevelop on your lot, because it happens, right? I mean, would be totally unreasonable of us to say you can't cut down any trees ever. And it wouldn't serve it, because it wouldn't be something that anyone could do. So we've just indicated that if trees have to be removed in order for redevelopment to occur, then this is what the expectation is in terms of replacement, and provided some information about that as well. So it is different for sure. It'll be a different design consideration, and it will require a little bit more planning, but it should be flexible enough that it will enable a redevelopment to occur on the lots in such a way that we're still protecting your beautiful lake. All right, so that's the end of the new stuff, the really significant new stuff. Now, I don't want to suggest that there isn't other changes to the document. I think it's important that you have a look at all of it, but those are the areas that we know are most substantially different from your existing land use bylaw, and we wanted to flag for you as you do your review. The last little bits here just deal with the districts themselves, and we haven't proposed any changes to the districts or the zoning map. The existing land use bylaw map, we've just translated into a prettier, colorful version to make it a little bit easier to read. I think, Brad, when we get to the end of this, we should also add the letters to the map too, just in case it's printed in black and white. Otherwise, it won't present. That's a note for us. But we haven't changed the districts or any of the lot zoning. You can see the two. The existing map is the black and white one. The new one is the colorful one. You have two residential districts, a small lot residential district and a large lot residential district. We made some minor adjustments to the permitted and discretionary uses in order to ensure that they're consistent with what's defined and the terms that are used in the regulations, because they weren't all consistent. And then we revised the front yard setbacks to be more consistent with the way that your lots are actually built. So I had mentioned that I think we had to talk about it more than once with council. The numbers that are in your land use bylaw and what is on the lots are not the same. The setback requirements of the existing land use bylaw are bigger than the way the lots have been developed. And when we were looking at especially some of the smaller lots, the setback requirements that are in the land use bylaw would make the lots undevelopable in some instances. So they're not achievable, they're not realistic. And so, you know, as much as we would like to try to have quite big setbacks, especially on the lake side, we just can't, and enable those lots to be developed. So taking into consideration the fact that there is a reserve strip along the front of the lake already, and taking into consideration the existing built form, we've relaxed some of those numbers in order to enable those lots to be redeveloped in the future without requiring big variances. So if you're wondering why that happened, it's because we can't figure out how it happened originally. It's trying to correct an error that I think may have happened the last time the land use bylaw was rewritten. So have a look at those two and let us know if you have any concerns or questions about those pieces.
Jane, I just have one thing to bring up, and that's kind of related to the R1 district. There is one parcel of land. If you go to the previous slide that shows the map slightly larger, there is one parcel of land that on the current land use bylaw map is zoned for residential. That is now to be park, and that is the one park space in the summer village. Yeah.
Can you see my mouse? the little white arrow. It's there's is it bigger on this slide or is it bigger on the other slide? Oh yeah, it is bigger on this slide. So there's one lot that is in the blocks. It's on 3rd Street that is municipally owned and functions as a green space or park. And in the existing land use bylaw map, it's identified as residential. And so thank you, Brad, for pointing that out. We've turned that one green instead of yellow. We've put that into the Reserves and Parks District because that's where it belongs. Thank you, Brad. But everything else remains the same. All right, the large lot, ooh, there's an error there too. So the small lot residential district is R1, large lot residential district, that should read R2. My apologies for that. Please note that that adjustment needs to be made. We made same sort of adjustments to the permitted and discretionary uses just to ensure consistency between the defined terms and the way that the terms are used in the bylaw and the way that they're listed in the regulations. And then we've added some information that provides guidance for the development authority about minimum lot size, building coverage, and then information about the setbacks into the district themselves, just to get it all into one place. So they're restructured. The information isn't necessarily new. It's just in the district itself instead of in a separate schedule. Is that a good way to describe it, Brad?
Yeah, that's how I would describe it.
Yeah, and then there was some information in the district provisions before that we moved into the general regulations because it applied to both districts. It didn't make sense for it to be in the districts themselves. And it was kind of misleading because it looked like you could just go to the district and get all the information you need, and you couldn't. You had to go to those other provisions anyway, so we moved it to where it belonged. The last district that you currently have and we've carried forward is your reserves and park district, and that's the green areas. And we did add some regulations there that pertain to shoreline stabilization, and we indicated that shoreline stabilization and development of stairs and retaining walls will be at the discretion of the development authority. I think it's highly unlikely that there will be too much of that because it would require approval from the municipality to do development in the municipality's land because there's that reserve parcel there, but I'm sure there are ways to get to the water through the reserve parcel. This is, I guess, a bit of a gentle reminder that you need to have a discussion with the municipality before you go clearing land in there or putting structures because that land belongs to the municipality. Brian, you have your hand up.
I do. That lot that you're talking about, the green one on 3rd Street, that is actually still an ordinary residential lot. It's never been reclassified, even though the Summer Village has put a playground on it.
Oh, you mean you didn't register it as a reserve?
No.
Through land titles? Yeah, that's okay. But it's got a playground on it and it's owned by the municipality, so it functions as a park, right?
Correct.
Yeah, which is sufficient. Yeah, it's municipal public land. It just doesn't have the R or MR or ER. In this case, it wouldn't be ER. But
I'm just saying, is it sometime in the future or something, if some council wanted to say sell that lot, they could.
They could, but then it couldn't be developed as a residential lot without doing a land use bylaw amendment. And I think that was one of the motivations council had for us to change it on the map. Because it would require a little bit more public engagement. Is that correct, Brian?
I was never aware of that myself, sorry.
Oh, well, it does do that. Council could sell that land if the community got into some financial hardship, but in order for that land to be developed for anything other than a park space, it would require an amendment to the land use bylaw map to change it back to yellow.
Okay.
Yeah, to do so.
I have no problem with that anyway. So.
Yeah, some public engagement to do that for sure. Okay.
Thank you.
So that is an overview. The last bit there was just the appendix map or appendix that we had attached that provides some information about setback requirements from different water bodies or water courses for new development or redevelopment. Brad, can you make a note for me to just have Allison in the GIS make sure that we have 30 meters between the bed and shore and the lots? I just want to, in looking at this again with fresh eyes, want to make sure that that's a realistic setback number. It may not be. And if
yeah, I think we definitely can. And there's also creeks and streams and wetlands also taken into consideration.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is a recommended setback chart that we use in many municipalities. And looking at this again and taking into consideration where your lots are in relation to the bend shore of the lake, I'll double check those numbers and make sure it's appropriate for you. I feel like it's something Allison probably did, but I can't remember. I think we probably did it about a year ago, and I just want to confirm that that'll work. And if it doesn't, we will remove it. So I'll report back in the what we heard report, what the findings are when we do that. A little bit more exploration there too. So moving forward, our request, and I'm pleading with you, is that you have a look at the land use bylaw. Most specifically, that you have a peek at those areas that we flagged for you. But please have a look at all of it. Look at your property, think about what your redevelopment dreams and aspirations are, and then think about whether or not what's proposed will work in relation to how you currently use and enjoy your property and what you'd like to do in the future, and let us know what you think, so that we can get that information back to council as they start thinking about and finalizing the document. So getting it ready into a format that we can move through the bylaw approval process, our first, second, and third readings in that public hearing. We've got a soft deadline there of May 20th, 2022, Brad, not 2021, for you to provide us with your feedback. So if you could, you can either send it to Sylvia or you can send it to Brad or I. I think the easiest thing to do would be to email Brad. We'll make sure that his email address gets added to the Summer Villages website, so you have access to that. Brad and I and Allison will compile that information and get that back to council and administration and out to you with some recommendations. So we'll look at it and think about how it could be incorporated and then make some recommendations. We'll put that together. We'll share it with council and administration and with you. We'll get, when we've got it together and once we've sent it to council and have their approval, we'll ask Sylvia to host that on your website too, so you can see it. And then we'll make adjustments as directed by council to the document and get it ready for consideration of bylaw approval. So that's sort of where we're at. Here's the draft. It is not complete. There are areas where I know council was not resolved, and we're anticipating you will have some comments and some feedback that will be very beneficial for council and for our office as well. You'll catch things that we did not, and we're hoping you can take some time to look at those things and provide us with that input so that we can make the necessary adjustments to the document to make this something that will work for you and your community. But that's where we're at. We have the straw dog and we need you to punch some holes in it and give us your feedback. So don't be shy. We're looking forward to hearing from you. I will advance the slide one more time there. There's my email address and Brad's email address and our phone number at the office. I think we will send this PowerPoint to Sylvia, see if we can get that on your website, Sylvia. And then Brad will send you the link for the presentation tonight as well. So if anybody would like to watch the session, they'll have the ability to do so after we conclude this evening, and then they'll have that information too. Brad, were there any questions in the chat as I went through that we need to address right now?
We covered the ones that sort of popped up as we went along. But if anyone has any that they would like to either add to the chat or raise your hand and we can work to unmute you, please do so.
I know I talked for 2 hours and it's well more than that, and it's 8:30 now, so I might have worn you out. So don't feel obligated. If you would like to take some time to think about those things too, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you later as well.
And I know that because the draft was only released a few days ago, we're not anticipating everyone to have had read it already. It is, as Jane mentioned, a very dry document and easy to fall asleep while you read it. Even professional planners do as well. That we anticipate you'll probably have questions as you go through it, and to please send those along, and we will do our best to answer them on the site on site, and if not, we will work to either getting you an answer or bring that up with council to figure out if we can get an answer.
Excellent job, guys. Thanks for your time.
Thank you
This was
so
a good
much.
presentation.
Thank you. I'm really glad that we have you here tonight, you guys. So yeah, I'll jump up on my soapbox one last time and ask you to just try and let your neighbors know that this is going on. The worst case scenario for us would be that people aren't aware of this until we get to the public hearing. I put my dog to sleep. I don't know if you can hear him behind me. He's having doggy dreams now. But so we'd like the opportunity to engage with community members and answer any questions, because once we get to that public hearing stage, it gets a little bit more difficult to do that. So the earlier people can get in touch with us and ask questions, the easier it is for us to answer those questions and make sure that their feedback gets to council before council gets into the approval part of this process. I didn't introduce council. Does everybody know the councilors that are here? I should have done that right at the beginning. Does everyone know Brian and Charlie? I'm going to hope that you do.
Yeah, I was just going to just say to everybody, thank you very much for participating for helping us out with the community and everything else. It's nice to have some community-minded residents to assist.
Thank you, Brian. All right. Oh, then I will. Oh, this is a screen. See what happens. There we go. So I will just end the session tonight. Brad,